I had been dating Olivia for about 2 months when she first told me about the marble. It was one of those conversations that started out innocently enough but left me completely unsettled by the end. At that point, we'd already told each other we loved each other. At least she had. She had said it with such conviction, her voice full of warmth, of hope, and of something I couldn't quite define. She looked at me with those soft, deep eyes and said, "I love you, and I want to be with you forever." I wanted to say it back. I did. I wanted to tell her that I felt the same, that I would hold on to her, that I couldn't imagine life without her. But how could I? How could I say that I loved her when, even though we shared these intimate moments together, she'd never spent a full night with me? Every time we got close to the moment where it could have happened, she would pull away, like a door slamming shut before you could even reach it. I'm not saying we didn't sleep together. Oh, we did. And I won't deny it was the most incredible night I've ever had, every second of it feeling like an eternity. We held each other, our bodies intertwined, feeling like we were made of the same breath. The connection was electric. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow. But as the hours wore on, and we began to feel the weight of sleep pulling us, that's when things got strange. She'd pull away, suddenly sitting up straight, her breathing fast and shallow. Her jade-green eyes would snap open, filled with panic, and she'd start frantically pulling on her clothes, like she was trying to escape from something. "Olivia, please, where are you going? Stay here with me." I'd beg, feeling the emptiness settle in the pit of my stomach. "No, I can't," she'd say, kissing me quickly before pulling away. "I have to go home. You know I can't stay the night. I've told you this before. But why? Why can't you just stay?" I couldn't help the suspicion in my voice. "You don't have kids, you don't have a husband. Why is it so hard?" Her face would tighten, a flash of something I couldn't read crossing her features. And then she'd say it, almost apologetically, "I just can't." I wanted to push her to tell me more, but I never had the courage. "I swear I don't," she said urgently, her voice low but steady as she leaned in, pressing her lips to mine in a deep, almost desperate kiss. The kiss wasn't just for affection. It felt like an attempt to soothe something deeper, something unspoken, as if she were trying to erase the doubts from my mind. Her hands trembled slightly as they cupped my face, and she pulled back with a long, drawn-out sigh, looking at me with those wide, pleading eyes. "I just can't sleep over. It's nothing bad, I swear. I have to go," she insisted, her voice breaking just a little with that final sentence, almost as if the words themselves were painful for her to say. I stared at her, searching her face for any signs of deceit, but there were none. I believed her, though there was still something gnawing at me, something that didn't sit right. It was like there was more to her story than she was letting on, but I couldn't bring myself to press her further just yet. She saw the hesitation in my eyes, and for a moment, her expression softened. She sighed again, closing her eyes as though she were preparing to say something heavy, something that would change everything. I watched her closely, waiting for her to speak. "Farid," she began, her voice trembling with an emotion I couldn't place. She looked down at her hands, wringing them together as if searching for the right words. "Please believe me, there's something about me, something I've never told anyone, not even my closest friends." I swallowed hard, my heart racing in my chest. What could she possibly say that was going to change everything between us? "I turn into marble when I fall asleep," she whispered, the words coming out in a rush, like a confession she had been holding in for far too long. I blinked, unable to process the information. I tried to laugh it off, hoping she was joking, but the look on her face was so sincere, so full of raw vulnerability, that I knew she wasn't. She wasn't joking. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to mask the disbelief in my voice, but failing miserably. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and leaned in, her face just inches from mine. "I'm serious, Farid. I turn to actual stone when I fall asleep. It started happening after an old boyfriend of mine." Her voice faltered as she paused, the weight of the past creeping back into her words. I could see her struggling to find the courage to continue, but I wasn't ready to let her stop. "What happened?" I urged, my own heart pounding now with a mix of concern and confusion. She looked away briefly, her eyes welling up with unshed tears. "He tried to assault me while I was asleep," she said, barely above a whisper, as if the very words themselves caused her pain. "It was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. I couldn't even fight him off. I was frozen in place. When I woke up, I was already turned to stone. I could feel the blood drain from my face, the anger inside me rising like a storm. My first instinct was to rage, to hunt down this man and make him pay for what he did to her. But I pushed that aside, trying to focus on her pain. I reached out for her, pulling her close to me, enveloping her in my arms. She shook as I held her, tears streaming down her face, and I whispered, 'I'm so sorry. No one should have ever done that to you. I don't know why this happens,' she continued, her voice choked with emotion. 'I've researched it, but no one understands. No one else has ever experienced something like this. I never dared tell anyone. I was too afraid they would think I was crazy.' I kissed her forehead, trying to comfort her the best I could, but the truth of her words, the rawness of her confession, shook me to my core. I sat there, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of everything she had just told me. I didn't understand how it was possible, but I could feel the depth of her pain, the trauma that lingered in her words. I wanted to ask more questions, but I knew she was struggling to keep herself together, so I simply held her, letting the silence speak for us. "I don't care about it, Olivia," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I really don't. You could turn into a frog when you fall asleep, and I'd still love you." Her eyes widened in shock, and for the briefest moment, I saw a flicker of hope there. The tightness in her shoulders seemed to relax, and she let out a shaky breath, as if the weight of her secret had lifted just a little. "Oh, Farid," she sighed, and her voice cracked with emotion. "You've never told me you loved me before. Not like this." I smiled, brushing the hair from her face gently, my thumb tracing the outline of her cheek. "I haven't? How remiss of me," I teased lightly, hoping to bring some ease to the tension in the room. "Well, I'm telling you now. I love you, Olivia. I love you more than anything." A tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly, almost embarrassed by her own vulnerability. But the relief in her eyes was undeniable. It was as if my words had erased a part of her fear, if only for a moment. "I was so terrified," she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. "Terrified of losing you. Terrified of how you'd react when you found out about the marble. I love you so much, Farid. I don't want to lose you." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close. "You're not going to lose me, Olivia. Promise. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Her voice broke as she continued, her sobs coming in ragged gasps. "I've never slept over with anyone since Barry. He couldn't handle it. When he saw me turn to marble, he freaked out. He couldn't cope, and she trailed off, her breath hitching. "He killed himself, Farid. He couldn't live with it. I wasn't to blame, but it feels like I was. I ruined everything." I kissed her gently, stroking her hair as she cried. Shoo, it's okay. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." But she continued, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "I couldn't be with anyone after that. Every time I tried, they'd start getting suspicious, thinking I was hiding something. They thought I was cheating. And then I started hearing the same doubts in your voice. Couldn't bear it, Farid. I couldn't take the thought of losing you, too." I held her tighter, trying to reassure her, but I felt the weight of her pain, the deep wounds that had been there long before I came into her life. I wanted her to stop talking about the marble, about Barry, about the other men she'd been with before me. I didn't want to hear any more of it. I just wanted to hold her, to make her feel safe, to erase all the pain she had been carrying for so long. But I knew deep down that she needed to talk. She needed to let it all out. She needed me to hear her, to understand her, even if it was the hardest thing for both of us. I held her closer, my arms wrapping around her protectively, my chest pressing against hers as I whispered softly, "Please, Olivia, please. It's okay. I believe you. I never meant to sound suspicious. I'm sorry. Stay with me tonight. Please. I don't care about the marble. I just want you." Her sobs began to slow, her breathing becoming less ragged, though I could feel the tremors still running through her body. She clung to me, her fingers digging into my skin as though she feared that if she let go, I might disappear. Her grip tightened, her face burrowing into my chest as I gently stroked her hair, trying to offer whatever comfort I could. We stayed like that for a while, in a quiet embrace, the weight of her confession still hanging between us but beginning to shift into something different, something more hopeful. And then, slowly, our connection started to change. The tears stopped, replaced by a soft, almost hesitant sigh, and she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying, but there was something in them now, something tender, something that made my heart skip a beat. Her lips brushed against mine in a kiss that was no longer filled with desperation or fear. It was a kiss of release, of letting go. It was the kind of kiss I had always hoped for but never quite expected. She wasn't just kissing me anymore. She was giving herself over to me, letting go of all her doubts, her worries, her past. And I knew that in that moment, we had crossed some invisible line. It wasn't just about passion anymore. It wasn't just about the physical connection. It was about us, our shared vulnerability, the trust we had begun to build piece by piece. I kissed her back, deep and slow, savoring the taste of her lips, the feel of her body pressed against mine. The energy between us shifted, no longer burdened by her secret, no longer weighed down by the pain of the past. For the first time, we were simply two people who loved each other, with no walls, no barriers. Just us. As the night wore on, everything seemed to fall into place. We moved together, our bodies syncing effortlessly, as though we had done this 1,000 times before. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was spiritual. It was emotional. Every touch, every kiss, felt like an affirmation of everything we had been through, everything we had shared. We didn't need to speak. The way she looked at me, the way she held me, said everything I needed to know. She had let go of her fears, her past, and I was there, steady and strong, ready to catch her if she ever stumbled again. Time seemed to slow down. Hours passed without us even noticing, lost in each other's arms, lost in the depth of what we were building. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel any sense of urgency. There was no rushing. There was just the present, just this moment, and in that moment nothing else in the world mattered. But eventually, exhaustion began to catch up with us. We had spent ourselves in every way possible, and our bodies craved rest. Slowly, we fell asleep, tangled together in the sheets, the warmth of her skin still pressed against me. I drifted into sleep easily, comforted by the sound of her breathing and the weight of her presence beside me. For once, there were no worries, no anxieties, just peace. I fell asleep with a smile on my face, grateful for her, for us, for the love we had begun to build. But the peace didn't last. I woke suddenly, my body tensing as a sharp, unnatural chill ran through me. The warmth that had surrounded me only moments before was gone, replaced by an icy coldness that pressed against my neck and skin. It felt like a weight, something heavy and unfamiliar, was pressing into me from all sides. My eyes snapped open, heart racing in confusion, and I quickly reached for the bedside light, flicking the switch as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The harsh light blazed on, cutting through the darkness of the room, and that's when I saw it. The shock hit me like a punch to the gut. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes locked onto what lay beside me. It wasn't Olivia anymore, or at least it didn't look like her. Lying beside me was a statue of a woman, molded in marble, her body cold and lifeless, but still unmistakably hers. The details were hauntingly perfect. The veins of jade green and jet black streaking through the stone, the curves of her arms and legs interlaced with mine as if frozen in a moment of intimacy. Her face was almost serene, though there was a subtle, unspoken agony in the way her eyes were wide open, staring at me. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. I reached out instinctively, my hand trembling as I touched the cold stone that lay against my chest. And then I heard it. A faint, unnatural shiver, like the creaking of stone. It was subtle, but it was there. A pulse of warmth began to spread from the top of her head, like the very essence of her life was returning. Her skin began to change from cold, hard stone to soft, human flesh. I watched in disbelief as her fingers began to twitch. Her lips parted slightly as if she were waking from a deep, unnatural sleep. I jerked away, my heart pounding in my chest, panic surging through me. My arms and legs were trapped, caged in the stone. I tried to pry myself free, but the coldness was too much, too suffocating. The sound of stone scraping against stone echoed in the room as I fought to break free. And then, as if on cue, her eyes fluttered open. I gasped in horror as her gaze met mine, wide and filled with agony. It was as if she had been trapped, as if she had been frozen in this state for an eternity. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a strangled cry escaped. In my panic, I shoved her off the bed, trying to get away from the sight, from the terror. She fell to the ground with a sickening crash, the sound of her breaking like glass. A loud shattering noise filled the room, and I heard her cry out in pain before everything went silent. I could hardly breathe, my body still trembling as I forced myself to stand. My legs were shaky, and my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Olivia!" I called out, my voice trembling as I edged closer to the broken statue that had once been her. There she was, lying on the ground in two shattered pieces, only her head still human. Her black hair spread around her like a dark halo. Her jade-green eyes were wide open, locked onto me in an expression of pure agony. Her lips were parted in a final, silent cry. I sank to my knees beside her, my hands shaking as I reached out to touch her, to feel her warmth. But there was nothing, just the cold, unyielding stone. The coldness pressed into my skin, an unbearable chill that spread through my entire body, making my pulse race. My right arm and leg were trapped, weighed down by something that felt like stone. I could feel the texture beneath me, not warm and soft like skin but solid and cold like marble. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to free myself, my breath quickening, my chest tightening as I fought against the stone encasing me. I gave a cry of terror, louder than I thought possible. The sound echoed through the room like a desperate, primal scream. I jerked my body, thrashing against the cold stone that seemed to be holding me prisoner, each movement only making me feel more trapped. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My heart was pounding in my ears, the sound deafening as I tried to push away the heavy weight that felt like it was suffocating me. I was free finally. With one last frantic push, I managed to pull myself away from the cold stone, my body shaking uncontrollably. But then I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I looked down at what was lying next to me. A marble statue. It was Olivia, at least it looked like her. The details were so perfect, so precise, that for a brief moment, I thought I was still dreaming, that maybe I hadn't fully woken up. Her body lay motionless on the bed, perfectly sculpted in white marble, with veins of jade green and jet black running through it like intricate patterns that made the stone look almost alive. Her arms and legs were locked in a still embrace with mine, her stone form intertwined with mine, as if she were still holding me, still trying to connect. Her face, her beautiful face, was frozen in a silent scream. Her eyes, those deep jade-green eyes, were wide open, staring at me in an expression of absolute terror. But they weren't human anymore. They were like the eyes of a statue, lifeless and cold, yet filled with so much emotion, so much anguish, that it made my chest ache. I stumbled back, my hands reaching out to her, but I couldn't touch her. Not like this. Not when she was turned to stone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could this be real? How could this be happening? I watched in stunned silence as a shiver ran through her form. It wasn't the kind of movement that would come from a living person, no. This was something different, something strange. The surface of her marble body seemed to tremble, and for a moment, I thought I might be imagining it, but no, it was real. The stone began to shift, very faintly, almost imperceptibly, and a flush of color spread across her face. It started at her forehead, and as if some invisible force was bringing her back to life, the human warmth returned to her skin. I didn't know what to think. My mind couldn't process what was happening in front of me. 1 second, she was a statue, an unfeeling, cold piece of stone, and the next, she was coming back to life, her features softening as if the marble was melting away. I could see her eyes begin to blink, slowly at first, and then more rapidly, as if she were struggling to wake up from a deep sleep. "Olivia," I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely more than a breath. I reached out to touch her, but my hand stopped just inches from her. What if I touched her and she shattered? What if she broke into a million pieces, leaving me with nothing but the memory of her? Her body seemed to pulse, like the blood was returning to her veins, pushing against the stone, forcing it to yield to the warmth of life. The color spread from her face, down her neck, across her arms and legs. Her fingers twitched, and then her entire body jerked, as though she were waking from a nightmare. Her eyes opened, fully this time. The terror in them was undeniable. She looked around, disoriented, and then her gaze locked onto mine. Her mouth parted as if she were about to speak, but no sound came out. She looked like she was struggling to form words, to understand where she was, what had just happened. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell her that I was here, that I wasn't going anywhere, but the words caught in my throat. There was a chasm between us now, something I didn't know how to bridge. Then, as if the universe had decided to break our fragile connection, she moved. Her marble limbs, which had been locked in stone stillness, suddenly shifted, and with a crack, I saw it. Her arm broke off and fell to the floor with a deafening crash. I gasped in horror, my hands shaking as I looked at the broken pieces of her. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was real. She wasn't some ghost or hallucination. Olivia, the woman I had grown to love, had somehow turned into stone while she slept. And now, she was shattering before my eyes. I rushed to her side, trembling as I knelt down beside the shattered pieces of her body. Her head, still intact, lay at the center of the broken stone. Her once beautiful hair, black as night, was now spread out across the floor like some kind of tragic art. Her jade-green eyes, still wide open, stared up at me in an expression of agony. Her lips, frozen in the shape of a silent cry, seemed to be begging for help, even though she couldn't speak. "Olivia?" I whispered, my voice cracking as I reached out, my hand hovering above her face, afraid to touch her, afraid to disturb what remained of her. "What happened to you? Why did this happen?" But there was no answer, no comfort, just the cold, unfeeling silence of the room, broken only by the faint sound of my own breathing. I stayed there, kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the woman I loved. And for the first time, I realized just how fragile everything between us truly was. How thin the line was between love and loss. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know how to fix this. But I couldn't leave her like this. I couldn't let her go. Not after everything we had been through. Not when I had promised her that I would love her no matter what. So, I gathered what was left of her in my arms, and with trembling hands, I held her close. I didn't know if I could save her. I didn't know if she could ever come back from this. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to give up on her. Not now, not ever.